Hello there, welcome to a very special, very cosy fireside edition of Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Chidello.
This week, the first Republican candidate debate and Donald Trump surrenders to police.
We're going to be looking at the winners, the losers and the prisoners with the Washington Post Mariana Alfaro and former Romney advisor Lanhee Chen. But first...
Eight candidates seeking the Republican Party's presidential nomination in 2024 appeared in the first debate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Wednesday night, local time. Not in the room, former President and current frontrunner Donald Trump, who announced his decision not to appear earlier in the week on his own social media platform, Truth Social. Irony not intended.
The public knows who I am and what a successful presidency I had. I will therefore not be doing the debates.
Notice debates with an S. The Trump campaign has not confirmed whether he means that he won't be doing any primary debates or just skipping this one. Trump did record a rambling interview with Tucker Carlson for online distribution just as the other candidates were due on stage. Here, then, is the state of the race. Heading into this first debate, Trump continues to enjoy a sizable lead in national polls. 55% this week in the Real Clear Politics average of national polls. As for those who actually did show up, centre stage, Ron DeSantis. He's got 14% on average in the polls now. Ron DeSantis is the 44-year-old second-term governor of Florida, a former member of Congress and Navy lawyer who served in Iraq and at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. DeSantis was hitting around 30% support in this campaign when he kicked off his campaign in late May, but it's been a steady decline ever since then. Coming third in the polls right now nationally, one of the big surprise packets of the campaign so far, probably the biggest, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's getting 7% support. This is Ramaswamy's first ever political campaign. He's just 38 years old. He made a lot of money in hedge funds and in a biotech firm. He's the son of Indian immigrants. He has become known, particularly on the internet, as an anti-woke libertarian conservative with a more than passing interest in a few conspiracy theories along the way, Chaz?
Yeah, look, his main strategy during the campaign so far has been to be more Trump than Trump. He said, I respect what Donald Trump did, but I think he went as far as he was going to go. I'm in this race to take the America First agenda far further than Donald Trump ever did. In fact, he's been so Trumpy that he literally turned up out the front of the Georgia courthouse where Trump was facing charges to announce that he was suing the Department of Justice on Trump's behalf. I don't think he actually gives two hoots about Trump, to be honest, but so far, the plan's working. Certainly he is Trumpian in his attention-seeking behaviour, that's for sure. If we look at the average of national polls now, once again, Mike Pence is there on 4%. 64 years old, the former vice president under Donald Trump. He was a loyal deputy to Trump right up until, of course, he resisted those illegal attempts by Trump to overturn the 2020 election. And Mike Pence then became the target of a deadly mob. Hang Mike Pence, they chanted. Well, he's also pretty well credentialed, you'd have to say. Pence is a former governor of Indiana, member of Congress. He has deep ties to Christian conservatives, or at least he used to until they went to the rather less godly Donald Trump side. The former South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley, is stuck in the threes in the average of national polls at the moment. The 51-year-old served as Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, despite having endorsed his rival, Marco Rubio, in the primaries. Once in office, she sometimes openly disagreed with Trump over issues like the Muslim immigration ban that Trump imposed. Ultimately, she served fewer than 2 years in the Trump administration. Yeah, I think she's been hampered a lot by her inconsistency when it comes to Trump. Like, she critiqued Trump loudly and repeatedly back in 2016, saying things like Trump is everything a governor doesn't want in a president. But then when he won, as you say, she joined his administration. She was quite complimentary then. And then she left, and then January 6 happened, and it looked like Trump was gone. He was out of the picture, and then she turned again. She then said Trump will be judged harshly by history and that Republicans shouldn't have followed him, and they shouldn't have listened to him, and they can't let that ever happen again. But then he made a comeback, and Haley then started praising his strong legacy from his administration and said, we need him in the Republican Party. I don't want us to go back to the days before Trump. Okay, now she says as little about Trump as she possibly can because she knows she can't win either way. And both pro-Trump and anti-Trump sides are fairly distrustful of her, and that doesn't leave many people in the middle.
No, and if you're going to flip-flop like that, if you get anywhere in the polls, then you're going to get the inevitable attacks that you're just another politician in an era where anti-politicians like Trump seem to be prospering. Also around 3% in the national polls, Tim Scott, interesting candidate, former US and South Carolina House member. He was appointed US Senator from South Carolina by Nikki Haley in 2013 to replace Jim DeMint when he retired to go and make more money at the Heritage Foundation. Tim Scott was the first black senator from a southern state since the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. He was elected in his own right in 2014. He was re-elected in 2016 and 2022.
Yeah, and in a parallel universe, he could be the favourite.
Yeah.
Because he's charismatic.
Yep.
He has a classic rags to riches story that he likes to tell us about a lot. He's optimistic, he's polite, he's warm. Unfortunately for him, he's not very 2023. Nevertheless, some big money Republican donors are paying attention to him as they start to freak out about what exactly is going on with Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
So he's also, by the way, quite religious. Probably the most religious person in the field apart from, obviously, Mike Pence.
Nobody is more religious. God's not more religious than Mike Pence at this stage.
No, and Iowa has a lot of evangelicals. So you throw that all together, Tim Scott's probably the candidate most likely to gain momentum fast if things go right for him at the beginning of next year.
Yeah, and importantly, because of those donors, he's got a lot of money in the bank right now, so he's well positioned. Next in the polls, also around that 3% mark, is former New Jersey Governor Christie. Christie was once a very popular Republican governor in a Democrat-heavy state, New Jersey, and that saw him being seen as a very serious presidential candidate. He ran for the Republican nomination in 2016, but a scandal over staff members, maybe him being involved, closing the George Washington Bridge in an act of spite, derailed that run. He dropped out of the race after getting nowhere. He then was one of the first senior Republicans to back Donald Trump's candidacy. They'd been friends for almost 20 years at that stage. And the bromance between Christie and Trump, it lasted, well, really right up until the 2020 election, when Christie says that he was appalled that that Trump tried to tear up the Constitution. Christie also still pretty annoyed at the fact that Donald Trump knowingly gave Christie, who's 150 kilograms, who's got asthma and diabetes, he knowingly gave Christie COVID by turning up without a mask after he knew that he had COVID at a debate prep. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, Chaz. Christie, as well as being a former governor, he's a former district attorney, a lawyer. He's a good prosecutor. He's a good attack dog. And right now, he's hell-bent on attacking Donald Trump. It's hard to tell whether he's actually running for president or he's just running to stop Trump being president.
Well, I hope that's all he's doing because he ain't going to be president. Sorry, Chris.
Newsflash.
If you look at his favourability ratings, he is incredibly unpopular amongst Republicans. But he's equally unpopular amongst Democrats and amongst independents as well. Look, Christie's uniting America.
Well done, Christie. Now, the final two on the debate stage this week, Asa Hutchinson, who is stuck in that sort of death zone of under 1% of the average of national polls. He's 72, he's an old school Republican. He served 2 terms as governor of the southern state of Arkansas. He was a member of Congress. He was appointed to various positions in both the George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan administrations as well. So, you know, he's got great credentials. Personality-wise, kind of dull, and you'd have to say also completely out of step with the Trump era. But he has been one of the few senior party members who've been willing to openly criticise Donald Trump, even before Christie thought it was a fashionable thing to do.
He actually called for Trump to drop out of the race entirely when Trump's third indictment came to drop.
And finally, on the stage this week, we had the North Dakota Governor, Doug Burgum. 67 years old, 2-term Republican governor of what is a deep red northern state. Burgum was a software business owner before getting into politics. His farm boy made good story could resonate with voters in places like Iowa and New Hampshire, but so far that is not showing up in any of the polls for Doug.
Sorry, I know nothing about this guy at all, but I am definitely going to buy his T-shirt.
Which you only do when the campaign ends, right?
That's right.
OK, there's
Very
a prediction. So those 8 plus Trump qualified to appear on stage in Milwaukee. They met the minimum poll and donor requirements. Others like former Congressman Will Hurd, radio shock jock Larry Elder, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez and businessman Perry Johnson, who are all running for president, missed the cut, and the cut only gets harder from here. Now, let's go through some of the highlights from this week's debate, and we'll check them off as well on the Planet America scorecard. We'll rate which of the candidates did what we think they had to do and which ones fell short. We'll give them a cross or a tick as we go. First, let's go to Ron DeSantis. Reports last week were suggesting that he was going to have a big red target on his back in this debate, so we were kind of expecting a Ron pile-on. But that didn't really happen. Instead, he delivered tightly scripted, well-prepped, at times overly rehearsed answers. He also seemed to have brought a bunch of tickets for his supporters because, have a listen to this, every time he so much as cleared his throat, he was getting really enthusiastic cheers from the audience. Here's a typical DeSantis answer, trying to tout his record as Florida governor on crime.
This is a symptom of America's decline, and one of the biggest reasons is because you have George Soros funding these radical left-wing district attorneys. They get into office and they say they're not going to prosecute crimes they disagree with. The inmates start running the asylum. There's one guy in this entire country that's ever done anything about that. Me.
Look, I thought that was a great grab, actually, because it shows that he gets stuff done, unlike Trump, which is his main critique of Trump without directly critiquing Trump, saying, I get things done, other people don't get things done so much, they just talk more. I also had a nice little dog whistle about George Soros.
What was that about?
Well, the reason it's a dog whistle is because Vivek Ramaswamy went to graduate school on a Soros family scholarship, right? And George Soros is a swear word amongst Republicans, right? And now...
Sometimes just a euphemism for a way of anti-Semitic dog whistle as well.
Well, actually, Trump sometimes calls, or Trump's people calls DeSantis DeSoros as well.
Yeah, right.
Like they like to accuse each other of being George Soros, essentially. But he did that to nail Ramaswamy. It wasn't an accident, trust me.
Interesting. Now, Ron DeSantis gets a tick from me. It was not a brilliant performance by any means. It did seem kind of, lacking in spontaneity, but he didn't get attacked. And he came out of it, I guess, doing what he needed to do, which was not to fall flat on his face. So he gets a tick from me. How about from you?
Okay, well, look, first of all, a lot of people have noted that he didn't get attacked that much because he was almost an afterthought in that debate. Like, he wasn't the main man. Like, Ramaswamy was acting like the main man rather than him. I don't think that matters. He doesn't need attention.
Right.
He's already got plenty of attention. He's got plenty of money. He doesn't need that. What he needs is to be, he's not going to beat Trump one-on-one. That's pretty obvious at this point in time. He needs, if Trump falls over, for him to be the person who takes over. He needs to be the most likely presidential candidate out of the rest of them. And I think that he did very well in that regard. He was untroubled, unperturbed. He was in his little bubble. Krakatoa was erupting around him throughout the debate, constant crosstalk and arguing, and he was just looking right down the barrel, talking directly to people all the time, just being untroubled by anything going around him. I thought he was powerful and he was strong. Yes, at times robotic. I don't think that's a problem. I think also he related things to Democrats all the time, like when there was a tough question, like I say about whether Mike Pence did the right thing on January 6th, I'd say that's not a tough question for me. But for him, when he's not trying to alienate Trump supporters, that's a potentially tough question. He just made it about Democrats.
Yep.
And you can't lose when you make it about Democrats, because the most powerful force in American politics is negative polarization. Yep. And he just nailed it over and over again. So I think he did what he needed to do, which is a big tick.
Yeah, disciplined, dull, kind of robotic, very much Mitt Romney 2.0 at this stage. And Mitt Romney, of course, just sort of stayed out of the line of fire for a long time and was ultimately the nominee. So it could be a strategy that works.
Yeah, and can I also make the point that unlike Tim Scott, who he was competing against for donors as well, he didn't plead for calm at any point in time. He just, when he wanted to speak, he just took control.
Yeah.
And there's a real sort of alpha element about that, which I think Republicans respond well to.
Yep.
And I'm at the time he was on Twitter, he was getting knocked a bit for being robotic, but I thought, this is cutting through.
Yeah. And he's mimicking Trump enough to basically wear the identical blue suit, red tie, white shirt combination as well. But yes, as you suggested there, Chaz, sharing centre stage with Ron DeSantis and really dominating, particularly the first half of the debate. But he was the centre of attention all night. Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, this is his first ever campaign. It's his first ever political debate. He has never done this before, and he came across as kind of a Trump mini-me. he was prepared to say and do things that regular candidates never would. He was licking his finger, holding up into the wind to suggest that Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis were just, political hacks, basically. And he was tossing out one-word phrases, political talking points as if it was confetti. He didn't bother to try and nuance his answers. He didn't have to defend any political record. He has no record to defend. He just said stuff like this on climate change.
I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
That there is pure Ramaswamy. Okay, he throws out this bomb. You're all bought and paid for. People go, what's that? The people start fact check.
Yeah.
What's he talking about? He moves on to the next bomb immediately, which is the climate change is a hoax thing.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't care what he says. He's throwing bombs all over the place, leaving a trail of destruction behind him, and having fun, doing it with a smile. He's quite unsettling to people that he doesn't really care the effect he has.
Well, this is where he is Trump-like. I mean, visually, he doesn't look an awful lot like Trump, doesn't sound a lot like Trump, but his bluster, his shamelessness, his ability to just say things that can be demonstrably untrue or are a dangerous dabbling in conspiracy theories, and he just cheerfully moves along. That he is kind of the happy warrior version of Trump. It's going to be fascinating to see whether he gets anywhere or whether he is just a bit of a flash in the pan.
He's definitely just as loose as Trump, that's for sure. And also like Trump, he changes his mind just on a whim. For instance, that climate change is a hoax thing he said, right? This was him 2 weeks ago.
So I think we have to reckon with the facts to say that are global surface temperatures going up? Yes, it appears to. That's a fact.
But because of the emission of carbon.
Because of broadly man-made causes, including but not limited to the emission of carbon, and also non-man-made causes. Yes. Is that an existential risk for humanity? No, it is not.
Okay, so he's not a greenie, right? But he's explicitly acknowledging that man-made climate change is a reality there.
Yes.
2 weeks later, it's all a hoax.
Yep.
Just flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. He does this all the time.
Yeah.
He's flip-flopped on I could spend hours talking about all his flip-flops. Doesn't really bother him at all. The only thing he's been consistent on for the last probably 15 years of his life is that he loves to rap as Eminem.
Lose yourself in the music the moment you own it, you better never let it go. This moment I hope it don't get you. Lose yourself in the music the moment.
Yeah, he's fun. He's an attention seeker like Trump as well. I get the impression as well that he's just as he's playing the part of a rapper there, he's playing the part of a political candidate. I mean, his talking points were peppered with quotes, whether they're intentional or not. Or he's just absorbed them through osmosis. He described himself as a skinny guy with a funny last name. That's how Barack Obama described himself. Yeah. He also, knowingly or otherwise, used quotes from Ronald Reagan. He literally owns a piano that used to belong to President Richard Nixon, and he plays it every day. It's almost like this presidential campaign of his is kind of like he's just this fanboy, and he's just playing the part of a presidential candidate, and he is untethered from the kind of strict message discipline that other candidates, pass their words about something like climate change. He can just talk in absolute things, throw out claims like, it's a hoax, and it's like, oh, cool, it's a hoax, right, we don't have to do anything about it.
But once again, that's like Trump. That's part of the anti-politician thing. He's not like a politician, right? And the fun thing I think is really important because that is what separates Trump from all the copycats, like the Ted Cruz's and people like that. They could never hope to match Trump's sense of fun. You go to a Trump rally, it's a ball, it's a blast for these people. Ramaswamy is the first person I've seen who tries to match that vibe.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's the new Trump, but I'm saying he has nailed some key parts of Trump that other people haven't gotten close to.
He hasn't got 30 years on television and in the tabloid media that Trump had behind him. To me, I could be very wrong, we'll find out in a few months. To me, he's one of these summertime flash in the pans. He's the next Herman Cain, he's not the next Donald Trump.
Fair enough. I'm not saying he's going to kick on, but the other thing about him as well is that he's bright. He's actually bright.
He is.
Like for instance, I haven't seen anyone get a line off on Christie before. Christie's the one who dishes out the abuse.
Yes.
Right, but Vivek got pretty much line of the night.
President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century. It's a fact. And honest to God, your claim that Donald Trump is motivated by vengeance and grievance would be a lot more credible if your entire campaign were not based on vengeance and grievance against one man.
Like, even Chris Christie acknowledged that.
He just impersonated Chris Christie to his face.
Yeah.
That was a Chris Christie-style slapdown.
Yeah, it really was. He is a bowerbird, as you say. But look, it's working.
Well, we'll see. Ramaswamy, I guess, though, at the end of the day, he did what every newcomer on the national stage has to do. He gained attention. So he does get a tick from me. He does have wacky ideas, and at times he went from kind of being this enthusiastic, high-energy presence to being just plain annoying. I'm not sure if that's going to help him or not. Tick or cross from you?
I don't think he's going to be president, like, probably ever, and certainly not now. But that's not what he's trying to achieve. He's 38. Yep. He's not going to be president, right? He's trying to build his brand. 6 months ago, he was about to sign on with the Daily Wire as a talkback host. Yep. That's what he wants to do. He wants to do media. He wants to be Tucker Carlson. Yeah. He's building his brand to Billio. Huge tick. 59% of people hadn't even heard of him. Voters hadn't even heard of him before this debate last night. Yep. He got 3 times as many Google searches as everyone else.
So he's going to be on Twitter X with his own TV show in a few months.
I have got no doubt. Whatever he wants to achieve in terms of brand recognition and try and make himself a thing, he will achieve. So tick.
One thing that Vivek Ramaswamy certainly managed to achieve was getting under the skin of pretty much everybody else on that stage, partly because he did keep drawing attention away from them when they wanted their moment. And you could tell that Mike Pence in particular really thought that Ramaswamy was an imposter, a dilettante. Maybe he reminded him of Donald Trump a bit as well. Now, Mike Pence, remember, he is now behind Vivek Ramaswamy in the polls. He slapped down the newcomer quite a few times, like this.
We're not looking for a new national identity. The American people are the most faith-filled, freedom-loving, idealistic, hardworking people the world has ever known. We just need government as good as our people.
Well, Mike, I think the difference is you might have, some others like you may have on the stage, it's Morning in America speech. It is not Morning in America. We live in a dark moment, and we have to confront the fact that we're in an internal, sort of cold cultural civil war.
And we have to recognize the American people with the failed government in Washington, D.C. We just need government as good as our people again.
And you see Ramaswamy's ripping off Trump. Yeah. Like with the dark times.
Exactly. And Mike Pence, bizarrely, talking about a government as good as its people, that's a Jimmy Carter quote that he's stealing. So he's trying to be the kind of the holier-than-thou alternative to the crooks that we're getting rid of.
And we cut it short, but then Ramaswamy did the classic anti-politician thing, which is a government as good as people. What does it even mean? I have no idea what that means. Yeah. Just punctured the balloon. You know?
Exactly. Now, Mike Pence, I mean, he's got a difficult message to try and sell in this campaign. He's got to try and claim credit for what he and Trump achieved together while distancing himself from Trump's personality. He's got to justify his own decision not to help Trump steal an election. And it was 10 minutes into this debate that Mike Pence was actually the first to say the word Trump.
I'm incredibly proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration. I mean, in 4 short years, we rebuilt our military. We revived our economy. We unleashed American energy. And we appointed 3 conservatives to the Supreme Court that gave the American people a new beginning for the right to life.
Oh, that's right. He was there for those 4 years as well.
He was. It was a great effort to try and claim credit for the positives in the Trump administration. Like he was saying, I negotiated this particular immigration treaty, etc. But he's never going to get credit for it while he's running against Trump.
No, indeed not. Pence did project experience, strength, integrity. He quoted the scriptures at some length as if he actually knew them rather than learning them for the debate. But he did look sort of weirdly out of place, a throwback to another era. The question of whether he can convince Trump supporters who think, Mike, you had one job to do, don't certify that election, and he went ahead and did it anyway. So can he be heir apparent? It looks to me like an impossible task. I don't think he did enough this week to try and get that, so I'm going to give him a cross. How about you?
OK, to me, he seemed quite old. The quoting the scripture thing, that was wonderful in the 80s. Yeah. I just feel like the Republican Party now doesn't use Christianity as a spiritual thing. They use it as a cultural identifier. Like, they don't know this. They don't know scriptures, the people he's talking to. They don't even go to church. Yeah. Right? So I just feel like it just felt old. It felt anachronistic and old. I felt like he was genuinely getting irritated by Vivek, but not in a statesman-like way, in a get-off-my lawn kind of a way.
Yeah, I want to crush his head like a walnut kind of a way.
Yeah, so...
Right. Cross from you?
But, what's he trying to achieve? As you say, heir apparent. He's not going to pass DeSantis as heir apparent off last night. DeSantis was fusing populism and traditionalism. Pence was just traditionalism. Cross.
Okie dokes. Now to Nikki Haley. She's in a not dissimilar position to Mike Pence. She worked for Donald Trump. She criticised him, but she also wants to claim some credit for Trump's achievements. She was predictably strong on foreign policy as a former UN ambassador, defending US support for Ukraine. She also found a way to criticise Trump without it being a personal criticism. She made it, interestingly, around his lack of electability.
We have to look at the fact that 3/4 of Americans don't want a rematch between Trump and Biden. And we have to face the fact that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win a general election that way.
Now, she's right. The polls do say that Trump's unfavourables are very, very high. But for Trump supporters, for Republicans, hearing that this guy that you 70% of you say that he's terrific, that he's the most disliked politician in America, that's going to be a hard argument to make.
It is, but I thought it was an example of something that she did well all night, which was be incredibly pragmatic. She's trying to pitch herself as a general election candidate, someone who can win a general election, right? So that was a pragmatic argument. On abortion, people were throwing around different bans, and she said, what can you get through the Senate? If you can't get through the Senate, you're just lying to people. Like when they were talking about the debt, she was going, hang on, and they were bagging out Democrats. She said, well, how about the Republicans? How about what do we do? She was being very, very, very pragmatic the whole time. And I thought that was very effective.
Yeah. Interesting to see as well on education, it was clearly a question being teed up to lead to a kind of culture war discussion about transgender bathrooms.
Yeah.
Instead, she starts hitting more substantive points, more relevant points about America falling behind other nations when it comes to literacy.
Yes.
And so when she's talking about reading skills over, what logo is on the toilet door, she then acknowledges that. She doesn't dismiss that. She goes, oh, yes, of course we need to da-da-da. But we need to focus on education, as in reading, writing, arithmetic. That I thought was very clever as well, and goes to that pragmatism you talk about. Well, for me, Nikki Haley was the breakout performer in this debate. She was the first to declare she was running against Trump, and she managed to show why she is running in this campaign. She made a strong case, and that should get her a lot more attention. So mission accomplished, I think, for Nikki Haley this week. She does get a tick from me.
I'm going to play a long excerpt before I give my response, because I think that this was the most important exchange in the entire debate. It was about Ukraine, which is the most important issue amongst Republicans in that they completely disagree. They're completely divided. Nikki Haley picked the unpopular side of the argument, which is to put more money into Ukraine. She is being criticised as being a neocon, which is worse than a Democrat in the Republican Party. And that's the neocon side of that argument. She took the hardest part of the argument, and I think she smashed Ramaswamy. I'll tell you why in a second. Just look at this.
First of all, the American president needs to have moral clarity. They need to know the difference between right and wrong. They need to know the difference between good and evil. When you look at the situation with Russia and Ukraine, here you have a pro-American country that was invaded by a thug. But what's really important is go back to when China and Russia held hands, shook hands before the Olympics, and named themselves unlimited partners. A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that. Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
First of all, Mr. Ramaswamy, you have 30 seconds. Mr. DeSantis,
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon. And
Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to give
let me address
Taiwan
that.
to China?
I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm going
to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
Your watch,
so the reality
make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have shows in the pointless wars we've gotten into. I have to address that.
Okay, so that was the biggest response anyone got in the entire night. She had no cheer squad with her. She was taking the unpopular position, and she got the biggest cheer of the night.
Quite the smackdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And Vivek had the line. They were Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, but like he had the line there. Like but why was that so effective? The reason why was because she was completely authentic, genuine. She clearly cared what she was talking about. She clearly was serious, a serious candidate. And I feel like all night there was all kinds of theatre and rubbish and canned lines and prepared speeches, and you could just tell. And she'd cut through all of that by actually caring what she was talking about, even though she was talking about something that the audience actually disagreed with.
Yes.
And they got on board. And I think that is the reason she has found a position for herself in this race, even though she's polling 3%, and she's probably not going to beat DeSantis or Trump or like. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying she's made herself relevant when before she was irrelevant by actually reaching out to the Republicans who give a damn. And I think she did that incredibly well. So that's a massive, massive tick for me from someone who I thought had no chance whatsoever at the beginning of the night.
Yeah, I can certainly see her moving possibly to where Ramaswamy is now in the polls, into that third position as well. Well, now let's have a look at Tim Scott. He was perhaps the biggest disappointment of the night for me. He does have this compelling life story. Grew up with a single mother. He talks about having been an angry young man who found God and found purpose in life. He's now a United States Senator, and he has tried to cultivate a very positive message in all of this, avoiding getting drawn into debates around Donald Trump. He was on Capitol Hill, of course, the day of January 6th. He saw that mob as they broke in, but he doesn't blame Trump. He blames the people who broke the law by breaking in. So he's finding a way to not make this an anti-Trump thing. He was interesting as well. I guess one of his stronger moments was when he chided Vivek Ramaswamy and Christie as well for all of their bickering at each other.
Going back and forth, being childish, is not helpful to the American people to decide on the next leader of our country.
Now, that is the highlight that pretty much everyone has played from him. I'm not having a go, but I'm saying that has been the highlight of the night.
Yeah.
What kind of highlight is that? Playing schoolmarm.
Yes.
That tells you how successful he was during the night.
He's trying to position himself as being on a higher moral plane and as well as being a sort of a positive way of conservatives to look at the African-American experience, which is pull yourself up by your bootstraps with the help of God rather than the help of government, which is, and you know, it is a good message, to be running in a Republican primary. But you're right. I mean, every time he spoke, he seemed to just be sort of burping up pages from his stump speech. There was not a lot of new stuff. Ron DeSantis at least had new rehearsed lines. Tim Scott, there was a sense of, is that all you got?
Yeah. Look, I got to say, I was disappointed as well. I felt like he played the traditional role of the senator in these debates who doesn't know how to speak and just drones on and on and on.
Yes.
But the thing is, he's not that. So I don't know why he was playing that role. It was a big failure for mine.
Yeah. He could have a plan B, which is to be Donald Trump's running mate in 2024. He might have a moment of his own in this campaign. We know that his fundraising is still pretty good. His polls are all right. He could take off. He could be the Republican equivalent of Obama's Hope and Change and everything else, but he didn't do very much to advance that cause this week. So he gets a cross on the scorecard from me. How about you?
Well, yeah, I'm surprisingly, given what I've just said to you, I was torn because I feel like by comparison to the constant bickering and arguments going on around him, he at least retained his dignity. And so I felt like he even though he did nothing, he lived to fight another day. And so I don't think he hurt himself. I just don't think he helped himself either. So I gave him a meandering, sitting on the fence dash.
A dash. Not a tick or a cross, a dash. Well, now to Christie, the most openly critical of Donald Trump on the stage. He ignored all the boos that he got. He ploughed ahead with his attacks like this one.
He said,
Get your MSNBC contributor.
he said,
these are politicized indictments, and we have to call out the truth.
Martha, it's important to say that the president said, Donald Trump said, it's okay to suspend the Constitution. Now, the oath you take is to preserve, protect, and defend, not suspend.
Christie also took on Vivek Ramaswamy, who was there, as a surrogate for Donald Trump, his major defender. But I don't know, Chaz, to me, Christie was a little bit half-hearted. He really wanted to be in the ring slugging it out with Trump and seemed deflated that Donald Trump had not been goaded into being there on the stage with him. Chris Christie really wanted that moment. He's got something personal he wants to get out of his system.
I 100% agree. There is no reason for him to be on that stage if he's not attacking Donald Trump. He's not going to be the president. His favourabilities are awful. Republicans don't like him. There is no point in him talking about what he did in New Jersey. No one cares. No one's going to vote for him. He is there to he is a missile to take down Trump. That's how he's pitched himself. That's why he's there for our entertainment as we watch him take down Trump.
Yeah.
That's why he's there. And when Trump's not there and they're not even talking much about Trump, he's got no point. I don't think he did a bad job, but he just there was no reason for him to be there.
Yeah, and it's interesting with Chris Christie because nobody really thinks that he's going to be president at this stage. He's one of these people who thought he was going to be president for a long time, and possibly in 2012 he had a shot. If he'd run in 2012, he might have been the nominee instead of Mitt Romney. He believes that if he had run in 2016 and Trump had not run, well, he would have been the nominee. He did run in 2016, but he got nowhere because Trump stole his thunder because Trump's a bigger, brasher version of Chris Christie in a way. But he genuinely believes he would have been elected president in 2016 had Donald Trump not run and gotten in the way. And so, there is this this time it's personal thing. Chris Christie really wants to have a pop at Donald Trump, and he's angry at the fact that this guy nearly killed him, nearly literally killed him.
Maybe he should have taken a pot at Donald Trump in 2016 rather than Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Very good point. Chris Christie certainly swinging lots of haymakers this week. He might end up taking down Vivek Ramaswamy just as he did Marco Rubio in 2016. But of course, that just cleared the way for Donald Trump to become president. So Chris Christie, memorable lines. The media love him. He even fielded a question about UFOs with relatively good humour. But he didn't do any damage to Donald Trump, who wasn't there. He didn't further his chances as a presidential candidate. So for me, Chris Christie gets another cross. Chaz, have a go.
Like I said, he can speak well, but he didn't achieve what he wanted to achieve. He's there to try to disqualify Trump in some way, shape or form. He made no impact whatsoever. He barely talked about Trump, and when he did, he wasn't particularly effective. And he's not going to take down Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek Ramaswamy loved when they had a little engagement. He almost high-fived Chris Christie. He loved it. So he just cross. He did his best, but cross.
Yeah, OK. Now, as for Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, the other two on the stage, they probably shouldn't have bothered to turn up. Hutchinson looked like a throwback to the 1980s. Burgum looked like the small state governor that he is. And it probably didn't help that Burgum hurt his leg playing basketball and was clearly in pain. He was looking a little bit clammy and nervous as well. Both of these guys, I guess, are just obscure trivia questions waiting to happen, Chaz. Like, who are those other two guys, those governors that were on that stage in that first Republican debate? So a cross for both of them from me, Chaz. How about you?
Oh, sorry. I've just been buying their shirts online. Both of them at once, right away, before it's too late. Look, Doug Burgum was a very nervous debater. I think he was a bit overawed by the occasion. He said, I give him credit. He said one thing which I really liked, which was that we shouldn't be talking about federal laws on abortion because it's not in the Constitution. We used to care about the Constitution, let's follow the Constitution. I thought it was really nice. Doesn't win your votes.
No.
He had no reason being there. They're not going to get anywhere. Cross.
Yeah, Republican Jay Inslee, I think. The Washington Post did poll potential Republican primary and caucus goers after the debate. And the results are really interesting. Take a look at this. 29% said Ron DeSantis won the debate, followed by Vivek Ramaswamy on 26, Nikki Haley third on 15, Mike Pence was the winner according to just 7% of voters, Chris Christie and Tim Scott on 4, Burgum and Hutchinson 1 apiece. I assume they were members of their immediate family, but not all of them.
I'm still surprised.
Yeah, exactly. We asked the Washington Post Mariana Alfaro for her take on this debate and on that poll of debate watchers as well.
I was surprised that DeSantis pulled that high on the amongst the readers, just because we expected him to be the center of focus of the debate. We expected him to be the one who spoke the most, the one who had to defend himself in this record the most, the one who had the biggest platform to share, because again, he's pulling a distant number 2 to the former president. But he was very silenced during the debate. He didn't really get that much fire, which means that he didn't really have to, go up and defend himself. But that also means that he didn't have the time to continue touting his platform. So I was surprised that voters, the people who participated in this poll saw that he came in number 1 because, again, he did not get the attention that I expected him to get on the stage.
Well, for more, we're joined by Lanhee Chen. He's a former senior advisor to Republican candidates, including Mitt Romney. So, Lanhee, this was a weird debate, wasn't it? I mean, the overwhelming front-runner wasn't even there, and a guy nobody's ever heard of, Vivek Ramaswamy, was the centre of attention.
The fact that Trump wasn't there actually, I think, works to his advantage in the sense that he didn't have to subject himself to any of the barbs that would have come from his opponents. And frankly, nobody needs to know who Donald Trump is. Everyone knows who he is. So it's not like he lost anything for not being there. I think he was the big winner. Your question, of course, refers to Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a little bit of an internet sensation, probably was before last night's debate. And he sort of offered a little bit, I think, for every Republican primary voter. A lot of people watching that program were probably nodding along to him at some point. Whether it actually translates into him being competitive or him being the nominee, that I am much more skeptical of. Because at the end of the day, the feedback that a lot of voters had about him was that he's too young and too inexperienced, and I think that is going to stick. But fundamentally, I think the big winner from last night's debate was Donald Trump. Because he continues to proceed relatively unrestricted to a win in the primary, given his current standing and given how many Republican primary voters are fond of him.
Okay, so given that Trump wasn't there, do you think anything that happened last night could actually be meaningful?
I think Nikki Haley demonstrated that she can be an effective general election candidate. Her answer on abortion policy, for example, was squarely targeted at independent voters, and I think that certainly works to her advantage. I thought because Ron DeSantis was not attacked, because he was not taken down by other candidates, and that was the expectation, certainly my expectation going into the debate, I think in that sense you consider it a win for DeSantis to come out of it relatively unscathed. And, a number of candidates performed well, but not in a really impactful way. Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, I think they had good debates, but I don't think that they were standout debates. And I think so in that sense, for both of those candidates, it's not like they were able to get a whole lot out of their time on the stage last night.
Lanhee, there were some significant policy differences on display as to whether the candidates support a federal ban on abortion or leave it up to the states. And then, of course, the different variations on how much support should be offered to Ukraine. What of those policy differences matter, do you think?
The Ukraine debate was really stark to me. What you have essentially are the top three by poll numbers, Trump, DeSantis, and Ramaswamy, all expressing a certain measure of opposition to continued U.S. involvement in the Ukraine conflict. And that to me is really staggering because it represents a 180-degree turn from where the foreign policy establishment in the Republican Party had been. And that was largely articulated by Mike Pence and Nikki Haley last night. This sort of general notion that the Republican Party should be engaged, should recognize that what happens in Ukraine impacts not just Europe, not just the UK, but the entire world. That point of view really is not ascendant within Republican circles now. So that was a stark contrast to me that reflects really how far the Republican Party has come from the established foreign policy points of view that we saw during the Reagan and Bush eras.
It seemed like there was a lot of agreement on most of the issues last night. So would you say that Ukraine is pretty much the last real bone of contention as far as policy goes in the Republican Party at the moment?
It's not just Ukraine. I think you see it on issues involving fiscal policy, like whether we need to reform Medicare and Social Security, the two large U.S. entitlement programs. There, I think you see some measure of disagreement. Nikki Haley coming out very early on and very forcefully saying, we need to do something about these. We got to figure that out. Contrasted with the Trump, Ramaswamy, probably DeSantis position on this. So there are a few areas of disagreement, but the one point I always make about primary debates, and I've been involved in preparing candidates for over 30 of these debates in my life, what you're really looking to do is to draw distinctions on very narrow areas where there are disagreement, because on 95% of issues, those candidates on that stage last night agreed. And so primary campaigns do come down to really blowing up the areas of disagreement, however small or minor they might seem. Now, Ukraine's not a minor disagreement, but it is one area where they were able to do that, fiscal policy being another, abortion. Even there, the differences, I'd argue, are relatively more subtle because you have 95% of the candidates, as I said, agreeing on everything. And all of those candidates last night were pro-life candidates. So their disagreements on abortion, I think, are relatively marginal.
Of course, Lanhee, as Richard Nixon famously found out in 1960 in his debate with JFK, In television debates, appearances really, really matter. If you come in looking a bit haggard or sweaty, the optics alone can undermine your message. What did you make of the optics in last night's debate? Who looked more presidential?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think any of them look sweaty. I think Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and DeSantis, to a certain measure, all met the sort of, does this person look potentially like a president concept. So I think they all accomplished that point of view. You know, Ramaswamy, I can't tell because he's so polarizing. You talk to some people, they thought he was great. You talk to others, they thought he was annoying. So, it's hard for me to judge on that measure. But I think a lot of the candidates last night, I think Doug Burgum, who probably is not going to win this primary, but represented a sort of Midwestern sensibility last night. So I think a number of candidates, as I said, they can take positives from the debate last night. But there was no single breakthrough performance in my mind that was significant enough to really have an impact on the race. The dynamics of the Republican presidential nominating race are exactly as they are today as they were yesterday before the debate. And so in that sense, if you're Donald Trump, you look at that and you say, great.
On Ron DeSantis, he didn't really make any mistakes. He seemed to deliver almost perfect answers, perfectly targeting his strong areas. But on the other hand, that, to me at least, made him seem slightly robotic. Is that a good trade-off for him?
Well, I disagree a little bit, Chaz, in the sense that I think that there were times when he was maybe a little too passionate, pretty passionate at the start. Other times he sort of, after the first commercial break, he almost seemed to kind of take it down several notches and became calm Uncle Ron DeSantis as opposed to fiery Ron DeSantis. And so, there were a couple different presentations of Governor DeSantis last night. I think mixed all together, as I said, it was a credible performance. I don't think it was an earth-shattering one. Now, going forward, to take Donald Trump out, he's going to need performances that are a little bit more fiery, probably ones that are a little bit stronger if Trump is on the stage with him. If not, this is going to be a very difficult task for Ron DeSantis to try to take down Donald Trump without ever having that direct confrontation with him. It will be a challenge. And so I think we will see as we go forward how Donald Trump approaches these debates, whether he decides to get involved. And I think those are all going to be critical questions that we'll have answers to as soon as the next debate on September 27th.
Lanhee Chen, we always appreciate your insights. Thank you for being with us again on Planet America.
Great to be with you.
Well, after turning down the Republican Party's invitation to appear in the Milwaukee debate, Donald Trump did appear in an interview with Tucker Carlson, and in it he explained his reasons for skipping the debate.
You see the polls have come out, and I'm leading by 50 and 60 points. And, some of them are at 1 and 0 and 2. And I'm saying, do I sit there for an hour or 2 hours, whatever it's going to be, and get harassed by people that shouldn't even be running for president?
Poor Donald getting harassed. He also took some pot shots at the left, saying that he expects Democrats will try and steal the 2024 election from him as well.
They're savage animals. They are people that are sick, really sick.
Now, that interview may or may not have drawn very many viewers away from the actual debate. Almost 13 million people watched that debate on Fox News and affiliated stations. That web thingy formerly known as Twitter announced that 74 million people watched Trump with Tucker. Later, that was revised to 150 million. But experts do point out that that is rubbish, that a view on Twitter X can basically be just scrolling past it, not actually watching all 46 minutes. We don't yet know how many Americans will have watched Trump's next scene-stealing effort, though, when he surrendered earlier today to Georgia authorities after being indicted for election interference. The plane leaving Newark, New Jersey, the plane arriving in Atlanta, Georgia, the motorcade to the Fulton County Jail covered minute by minute with breathless commentary. It took Trump just 20 minutes to be booked post-bail, set at $200,000. Then it was back in the car, again wall-to-wall coverage, and then to the airport. Now, remember, he could have done all of this last week if he'd wanted to, Chaz, or earlier in this week, but he cleverly chose the night after the Republican debate to snatch back the spotlight. And just to make sure of it, he spoke to reporters before leaving Georgia.
What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it.
And then we got the image that many people have been waiting years to see, the mugshot of Donald Trump. The first time a former American president has ever had a mugshot taken. An instant classic, soon to be on T-shirts and coffee mugs everywhere. And it only took a few minutes for the deep fakes to start to appear on the internet. Here's one of the better ones.
Am I gonna cry? Am I about to cry? No.
Well, I've got absolutely nothing to add to that whatsoever.
That's a good thing because we're right out of time. That is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here at the same time next week.
And you can find us on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. And don't forget the PET podcast, which I rabbit on so much more about American politics there as well.
Even
right there.
more?
Yes.
Good night.
See ya.